Hey, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include redefine, redistribute, and redirect.
Wrong!
It's the wrong podcast, but we'll make it right. Spinning the world in a whole new light. Winning wild and a little askew. And the one who's right, it might be you. It might be you.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1! Irreversible. Girls and boys, I need to tell you a story. Foremost and first, you need to know that this actually happened to me. Later or sooner, I knew I was going to need to tell you about it, but I've had a lot of pull and push emotions about it. There's a lot of downs and ups in getting into it. I've gone forth and back and considered the take and give, but ultimately I've weighed the cons and pros and decided it's best to let you know all the outs and ins and all the turns and twists involved. So here's the short and long of it. I had an important meeting, but I decided to first stop at my local grocery store with a very specific list. I needed to get butter and bread and some pepper and salt. I was going to avoid all the berries and nuts because who can afford those in this economy? It was important to keep my list short because I didn't have a lot of time and didn't want to be debating the that and this of things to buy. The trip needed to be dry and cut. I didn't have a lot of take and give in my schedule that day and didn't want to get distracted by the aisle at Aldi with all the ends and odds. It wasn't the kind of trip where I needed potatoes and meat, chips and fish, or even salad and soup. Why do we think soup's a health food, by the way? But then I remembered I needed some jelly and peanut butter. So I started walking over to the butter and bread aisle, but I couldn't find it. Everything had been rearranged. Every and each aisle had the most random collection of food. I searched all over earth and heaven for it. Eventually, I asked an employee where the bread aisle was, and he asked if I was looking for wheat or white. I explained that I wasn't looking for either. All I wanted was jelly and peanut butter. He said demand and supply had really thrown off their inventory. On top of that, new management had come in and instituted all kinds of new regulations and rules. He understood my complaints because just that morning he was asked to review the new conditions and terms of his employment contract. He apparently had a bunch of new responsibilities and rights. Less or more, I got really irritated that he wasn't just showing me where the jelly and peanut butter was. I said, "Hey, look, buddy, later or sooner I've got to get going. I'm standing here in my tie and suit, looking tidy and neat. I've clearly got someplace else to be. I'm tired and sick of not knowing where anything is in this store. This place used to be shoulders and heads above everyone else. It just doesn't make any sense or dollars to rearrange the entire store and not put the J and PB near the bread. You've got me walking all thither and hither around the store without any reason or rhyme." After a little more pull and push, he eventually led me over to the honey and milk and showed me that that's where they keep the peanut butter now. Because, they're both sticky, I guess. I don't know. And then in a new turn and twist, he took me to the vegetables and fruit and showed me the jams and jellies right next to the oranges and apples, because I guess they're cousins? He told me I could choose and pick out of their very limited selection. For the death or life of me, I couldn't figure out what was happening. I had put my mind, soul, and body into getting out of the store as quickly as possible. And the store was extracting tears, blood, and sweat out of me. On top of that, everything now cost a leg and an arm. And I'm talking the good leg and the good arm. It was a burden for poor and rich alike. It's not like I was looking to dine and wine the Queen and King of England. I really couldn't take any more terror wear on my mental health. I reminded myself to stay collected and calm. This wasn't the crazy and wildest thing I'd ever seen. Shine or rain, I just needed to get out of the store and get some quiet and peace. Steadily and slowly, I went to the cash register and bought everything barrel, lock, and stock. I, of course, paid square and fair. I got to my car, which is my joy and pride. It's a 2012 fully loaded Ford Taurus, if you know what I mean. And I sat down. Before I could even start the engine, I determined that every and each day I would let everyone know this place is out to confuse you, sinker, hook, and line. And gentlemen and ladies, that is the short and long of it. And I swear I will never risk limb or life there again. It simply wasn't worth the effort and time. And that's my story. You can leave it or take it. And it won't break or make me one way or the other. I'm just glad I made it out, for worse or for better. Issue number 2! Zionism. There's all kinds of talk about what's happening in Israel and Gaza right now. Some discussion about whether or not the Palestinians in Gaza are being intentionally starved or not, if this is genocide or not. I'm not going to get into any of that because I have no impact on any of that. But one small part of it, and by comparison to everything else going on, it's small. But I hate the way people are using the word Zionism. People are, on both sides, pro-Israel, anti-Israel. They're using the word Zionism as a replacement for nationalism or for this idea that anything and everything Israel might do is holy and justified and approved by God. I consider myself to be a Zionist. That's weird, Tim. Why do you think you're a Zionist, especially with all that Israel is doing? It's because Zionism doesn't mean that everything Israel can or will do is approved by God. It doesn't mean that the nation state of Israel is God's one and only people. It means something very particular. Zionism came about in the I need to do the math here. It's not the 20th, the 19th century. That's the 1800s. Always confusing to me. Just on the 1800s, 19th century thing. I've got every other century nailed down. 4th century, 300s. 8th century, 700s. 16th century, 1500s. No problem. I get to the 1800s, I have no idea which century that is. But anyways, in the 1800s, that would be the 19th century, Jews were suffering persecution in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe, and they started talking about this idea where they needed a homeland where they would always have the right to defend themselves. Anti-Semitism was not going away. There was nowhere safe in the world for them to go. So some Jews started saying, we need to return to the Holy Land because that's where we're from. We need to regather there. There's already a large number of Jews in the area. We need to go back there and we need to establish a homeland for all Jews. And of course, after World War II, this idea really solidified. The world agreed. Clearly, anti-Semitism is a problem, and we just had an entire genocide of Jews in Europe because of the Nazis, and that's not the first time this kind of thing has happened. So we are on board. Let's give the Jews a homeland of their own where they can protect themselves. That's what Zionism means. It just means the Jews should be allowed to protect themselves. There should be some place in the world where they can go and they can always say, no, you will not kill us because we are Jews. And I have to say, I'm becoming more and more convinced. Like, I'm a Christian. You guys know I'm a Christian. You know I believe in forces outside of physical reality. I'm convinced there is some sort of demonic force around anti-Semitism. I can't explain it any other way than there is something at work to go after these people. Because it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense which side of the political aisle people are on. There are people on the extremes of any political spectrum you can imagine, and they get to these extreme viewpoints, and suddenly they like to say the word the Jews, as in that's the cause of all our problems. And I do not get it, other than to say there must be a demonic force going on. So because of that belief of mine, that in particular supernatural belief of mine, that anti-Semitism is not going to go away, I think the nation of Israel should exist. That's what Zionism ultimately means. It means the nation of Israel has the right to exist. It does not mean that they can do whatever they want. It does not mean that God is endorsing everything they do. And any Christian or any Jew or any other person in the world who thinks that it's okay for Israel to starve somebody or to indiscriminately bomb someone, they're wrong. That's not. It doesn't mean they're free from criticism. You should criticize Israel when they do wrong. And I hate it that some people who have that idea that God's endorsing the nation of Israel have started using the term Zionism to say that's what they mean by it. They've started using the term Christian Zionist. And I hate that critics of Israel are using the word Zionism to say, oh, you can't complain about Israel because of Zionism. And that's not what Zionism means.
I flatly dispute it. It's just friggin' wrong. I mean, just like super wrong. Like she should sit there in her wrongness.
That's my hobby horse. There you go. That's why I'm a Zionist. That's why I think you should be a Zionist too. I get it. Words change. Words have different meanings over time. But I think it's helpful to clarify what we mean. Hey, it's time. What are the rules?
Oh, what are the rules? What are the rules? Don't touch my fries or my garden tools. Oh, what are the rules? Yeah, I've got my quirks. Follow them closely and I promise it works.
What's the deal with vitamins? Why are they called vitamin A and B, C, D, E? You know how the alphabet works. And then we jump to K. I don't get that. And you know what would be really helpful? Instead of calling them vitamin D, tell me what that vitamin does. My 9-year-old and I were talking about this. She agreed with me. She has her own ideas about what the vitamins should be called. So this is a first for the Wrong Podcast. I'm going to play an audio clip of my 9-year-old offering her own rant about vitamin names. Enjoy. Okay, so tell me what vitamin A is.
So vitamin A is alligator no bite.
It's vitamin alligator no bite?
Yeah, because it can remind you, like, don't let alligators bite you, but it can also remind you, but like if you do push-ups every time you take it, like 10 push-ups after you take it, then that will mean you have the special power that it's impossible for alligators not to bite you.
Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a question, topic, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@therewrongpodcast.com or submit a comment at my website, therewrongpodcast.com. And help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show. I was wrong.
I was wrong. Oh, I was wrong.
Listener Brent. He had a comment last week, and then he wrote to tell me about that episode, and he said,
Hey Tim, I really liked the last episode. So much so that I listened to it twice. I love how you referenced The Office in the first segment. When you mentioned how HR ruined the company, I totally thought you were going to mention Toby from The Office, and how much Michael thought HR ruins everything. I also thought you were probably the most articulate K-Rock guest that they've ever had on their show.
Thank you, Brent. I appreciate that. Yes, I don't know how I mentioned a Toby reference when talking about HR and The Office, but thanks for backing me up and making sure that we all remember to hate Toby. Listener Eric writes in and he says, actually he didn't write in. He was talking to me because I was with him in Zion, not Israel, in the National Park Zion. That's not why I'm a Zionist. It's just called that because it feels like heaven there. And this is Eric, but I was also with another friend named Eric and a third friend named Eric. No, not the other Eric that wasn't there or that other Eric you're thinking of. Yes, I have a lot of friends named Eric. I don't get it. Eric, anyways, he wanted to know if a number of the segments in the show are just pre-recorded that I just reinsert every time I make a new episode. And no, I re-record every single bit of the podcast every time. Not the music, but all the Tim talking parts. And I do that. He's not the first person to ask that question. I do that because my voice quality actually changes week to week. And things about the humidity or the room or the microphone, the distance from my face, all that kind of stuff, I think you would notice if I didn't redo it every time. I might have allergies one week, for example, and you would notice a change in my voice. Listener Aaron, he's a new listener and he found the podcast, and I am not joking. I am not joking. The very first thing he said upon discovering the podcast was,
"Wait, you hate Biscoff and Wicked?"
That's right. Not backing down. Not going to back down. Thanks for finding the podcast, Aaron. And then listener Devin, he wrote in and said,
I love the callbacks to your refusal to do sound effects. Maybe you need a segment on all the other things you won't do.
Which just for some reason reminded me of that Meatloaf song. Maybe making sound effects was the thing that Meatloaf wouldn't do for love. Issue number 3, misled. I have this friend, I'm just going to call him Marcus. I'm not sure he was intending to write into the podcast, although he was willing to listen to an episode or two of mine that I directed him to. And I appreciate that. He wrote in because he was writing to me privately that he doesn't believe January 6th was that it was all just a setup to make conservatives look bad. And we had a brief interaction about it before, and then he privately messaged me with some videos proving that January 6th didn't happen. And he commented, "How do you like me now?" So I watched his videos and I said, "Hey, I watched them. Would you like to hear my feedback or pushback on those?" And he said, well, the first thing he said was,
"So, video and audio and all these much better versed people than I are now being misled? What is the right-wing agenda? Like, why would these people die on their sword for legitimate outlaws in prison for January 6th? The left's agenda was to destroy Trump and make conservative patriots look like unhinged rioters. Look at the big picture, and don't be sidetracked or misled yourself by miscellaneous, minor, trivial comments or some hyperbole, if that's what you mean. Center and right conservatives tend to just tell the story like it is and use common sense. It's the left and the Dems that always have to mislead and twist the truth for another agenda. Trump haters and God haters, hopefully not you, will do anything to destroy and smear a person and definitely don't want anything to do with God or Judeo-Christian values. It's always a spin, if not blatant lie, to tug on sheeple's emotions for policy making, rather than backing sound, economic, and moral reasons. The January 6th quote-unquote insurrection was a protest against Biden stealing the election, with Dems under Pelosi and others egging it on, and they took advantage of it to insert troublemakers to take things too far and make it look like it was a violent patriots out of control. That's just not us. We don't go around burning, looting, and destroying things to make a point. We love our country and our beautiful capital too much. And trespassing on the Capitol buildings? Oh, heaven forbid. Prison-worthy? Really? Is any of this new light on the subject convincing you otherwise? Or are you going to go down with the ship?
So I, as I mentioned, I watched his videos. I'm not going to play the whole video clip. He sent me 2 clips. I will include them in my show notes. I'm hesitant to do so because I don't want to promote the quackery that I think was in these videos, but I want intellectual transparency and honesty to rule the day here. So you can check out the videos yourself and see if I'm distorting anything they said, or if you found them convincing in one way or another. I would love to know from you. And you can find those at my at my website, thewrongpodcast.com, or it'll be in the show notes of this episode on any of the podcasting apps you're using. So first off, I just have to clarify for everyone that I have no love for Nancy Pelosi. I really do not like Nancy Pelosi. I am not a progressive by any means at all. I'd have no problem calling myself a conservative Republican until Donald Trump came along. I'm still a conservative. Nobody knows what a Republican is these days other than somebody who loves Donald Trump. And if that's the definition, then I can't go along with it. But outside of that, I would say I'm a conservative Republican. And the first thing I said to Marcus, and I sent him a number of videos to explain my viewpoint, and instead of just inserting all these videos, I'm kind of going over what I said to Marcus. And I found it better, rather than writing to him, to send him these videos. That way he could hear my inflection and my tone. I could present myself and my arguments the way I wanted them to sound in his head, rather than him reading them and hearing them the way he might think I'm saying things. So the first thing is, I want to caution everybody against language like only and never. For example, only Democrats lie. Only Democrats want to tear down the country. Republicans only want to tell the truth. That kind of black and white thinking, when you start with that premise, with those onlys and nevers, it will distort everything else you think about. Because that is simply not true. There are no onlys and evers. It will always be wrong to assume that there are onlys and nevers. I'm joking. That was a joke. That was funny. You should be laughing. But black and white thinking, it distorts our thinking. It causes us to rewrite the facts, because we have this idea that only these kind of people do this kind of thing, and these kind of people only do this other kind of thing. And when reality interrupts that, then we have to rewrite the facts about what's going on. We have to make sure the facts line up with who we think the good guys and the bad guys are. And this is very obvious to see in the other side. When the other side does this, it's so obvious to us. It is extremely hard for us to see it when we do it ourselves. And there are bad actors on both sides. You need to evaluate what those bad actors do based on what they do, not based on their politics. Somebody happens to agree with you about tax policy, doesn't mean you should look the other way when he's been accused of child rape. Somebody agrees with you on whether or not abortion should be legal, doesn't mean you should look the other way when he's having adultery with interns. Judge people based on what they do, not on their politics. In fact, what bad actors often do is they mimic your politics so that you will like them. Don't fall for that. If they do something wrong, even if you agree with them on something else, call them out for doing something wrong. And what I noticed about Marcus's comment there was that he really, really identified with the people who were there on January 6th. He was practically saying he was there, and he wasn't there. And I concede that he would not do anything violent. I think he was describing himself accurately, but he wasn't describing the people who were there accurately. I totally am on board. I believe him that he would not do anything destructive or violent if he was there. There were three basic kinds of people there on January 6th. There were the Trump supporters who were just there because Donald Trump said, I'm going to give this great speech. Come hear my speech. And people wanted to hear it. And so they came and they didn't enter. They didn't do anything wrong. That was the vast majority of people. The vast, vast majority of people are exactly as Marcus described them. People who didn't do anything wrong and wouldn't have done anything wrong and didn't do anything wrong. Then there's a second group of people. The second group of people got caught up in things. And they were told to go to the Capitol. They got there. There was people climbing walls and they see people walking through open doors. So they go through the open doors, and then they're walking down hallways, and people are chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and they're angry at Mike Pence, so they start chanting that too. They just got caught up in things, and they represent the vast majority of people who were in the building. And a number of them, there's one woman in particular that I really respect. She turned down the pardon from Donald Trump. She said, "No, I was there. I did exactly the things I was accused of doing. I got caught up in things. I lost my brain, and I shouldn't have done that. And I deserve the punishment, and I'm willing to do the time because I did the crime." And well done, lady. Like, so rare to find a person like this. The third group of people, these were militants. These were the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. And we have video of them. We know exactly who they are. We have video of them beforehand. We have text transcripts. We have audio from the day. We have video of them breaking windows and opening doors for people. We know exactly who they are. They weren't left-wing agitators. We know their names. We know all the things they said beforehand. We know all the things they've said afterwards. We know who these people are. There's not some mystery about who did this. And they very deliberately knew that there would be a large number of people that would go along. If they see that something's happening, they would join in because they were agitated. They had been agitated by all the rhetoric they had heard over the previous 6 weeks. And they were agitated by some of the things Donald Trump had just said and had been saying the days before. And there's this principle called the first follower. Have you seen that video of the carnival ride that starts to tip over? And I don't know how he thought to do this, but one guy is walking by and he starts to see it tip over and he grabs it. And he is not the most important part of that video. It's the second guy. It's the first follower, the second guy to grab it that really made an impact. Because the minute everybody else saw a second guy grab hold of it and start to pull down the carnival ride, then 20 of them showed up. That's what happened on January 6th. These Proud Boys, these Oath Keepers, these militants, they had a plan. They knew people would follow them if there were just enough of them to make it look like a first follower was there. And sure enough, a bunch of people followed along. And the vast majority of Republicans are not like those people at all. They both happen to have voted for Donald Trump, but their worldview and their ideas on how to fix things are not the same at all. And people who are supportive of Donald Trump are not militants like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. They are not like the people who beat cops over the head, who took flagpoles and shoved them into the face of Capitol Police officers. That is not the vast majority of Trump supporters. But people feel like when you criticize these bad actors, you're criticizing them for voting for Donald Trump. And no, you didn't do that. You wouldn't have done that. But those guys did, and they need to be condemned for it. And it only helps your cause if you condemn them. If people on your side do something wrong, and you say that was wrong, they shouldn't have done it, we're not going to have anything to do with them anymore, you get the moral high ground. So from now on, when somebody says, "Oh yeah, what about January 6th?" you say, "Yeah, that was awful. It shouldn't have happened. I'm glad they were convicted." And whoever just said, whoever threw that whataboutism at you, they lose the argument immediately. You just took all the wind out of their sail. They have to come up with some other lame argument. The whataboutism is a simple crutch, and you just kicked it out of their hands. So the other thing was, in the videos and in his statement there, he mentioned the insurrection, that this couldn't be an insurrection. And I feel it's important to define the word insurrection. An insurrection is not a coup, and it is not a rebellion. People think, oh, it's an insurrection. They're trying to overthrow the government. No, that's not what an insurrection is. An insurrection is often used in a coup or a rebellion, but it's not the same thing as a rebellion. An insurrection is a violent riot that's meant to interfere or interrupt the function of government. So you walk into a local courthouse and you throw a riot to keep your friend from being declared guilty. That's an insurrection. You don't have to have the aims to overthrow the government so that your friend gets to go free. You're just trying to keep your friend from being declared guilty in that moment. That's an insurrection. You interrupt a polling place violently, that's an insurrection. They were there to count the votes. And the riot was meant to interrupt that so that it wouldn't happen, so that people would see how angry voters are about the election results, and they would decide not to go forward and certify the election. That was the intent. It was an insurrection. In one of the videos, this woman says, how could it be an insurrection if they didn't have guns? You can't have an insurrection without guns. And there are lots of ways to be violent without guns. Just your fist alone, you can be violent. You can use clubs or spears or swords, or as we saw that day, flagpoles and bear spray and fire extinguishers. You don't need a gun to be violent. And thank God, I literally mean that. I am saying a prayer when I say thank God that nobody used a gun and that the Capitol police officers recognized that the people around them had guns and that they would be quickly outnumbered if they used their own guns. Thank God there wasn't more bloodshed because of guns. Okay, so in one of his videos, there is video of Nancy Pelosi, and the video complains, why wasn't Nancy Pelosi calling the National Guard? This is her fault. She should have been calling in the National Guard. And they have video of Nancy Pelosi saying, why didn't I call in the National Guard? And this video was such a bad faith interpretation of what she was saying. It should be obvious to all of you who might go and see it. Pelosi was being incredulous, as she said it, because she knew that she doesn't have the authority to call the National Guard. So the way she was saying it is, of course I didn't call the National Guard because I can't. But she was saying it in a way that everybody in the room with her, in the car, I believe it was, knew that she had no authority to call the National Guard. Only the president can call in the National Guard. The staff were begging him, Republican congressmen were begging Donald Trump, and even the vice president was begging him to send in the National Guard. And Donald Trump chose not to. He chose not to for many, many hours. He refused to listen to their pleas. Now, maybe the Capitol Police should have been more prepared, and Nancy Pelosi was in charge of the Capitol Police. She has authority and jurisdiction over the Capitol Police, and they clearly weren't ready for what was coming. And they should have been. Perhaps they should have been. Perhaps they should have known more. Perhaps they did know as much as they could have known and still weren't prepared. That might be on Nancy Pelosi. At one point in the video, Nancy Pelosi says, I was waiting for the trespassing. And the video makes it sound like that this was all just a setup by Nancy Pelosi because she says she was waiting for the trespassing. So she set this whole thing up to lure people in so she could get them on trespassing. And again, this is really bad faith. The way what she was saying was, I was watching what was happening outside. I could tell that it was moving from a peaceful protest into something violent. And I was waiting to see when they committed trespassing because I knew that things were escalating to a new level and something criminal was happening. So she says I was waiting for trespassing, not like I set it up and I was hoping that we would catch some people trespassing. That's not at all what she was saying. I think any good faith listening of the quote from Nancy Pelosi would agree with me. But don't take my word for it. Go check out the clip. And let's just be clear, trespassing was the least of it. Trespassing is a crime. It's a felony in the Capitol building. You deserve to be convicted for trespassing, but that was not the bulk of the problem on January 6th. Breaking and entering was a much bigger deal. Beating cops is a much bigger deal. Trespassing, for sure, a violation of the law, but it's not the bulk of it. And even today, the Capitol building is open. You can walk in. There are places in the Capitol building you are not allowed to go. If you go there, you will be arrested for trespassing. Like I said, I was just in Zion National Park. It's a national park. You can go wherever you want. There are places in that park that if you go, you will be arrested for trespassing. Like the residents of the park rangers who live there or their offices. You're not allowed to just go into any government office you want because you're a taxpayer. There are rules about where you can go. And not everyone got the same punishment. Because somebody was arrested for trespassing doesn't mean they got the same punishment, the same prison time as somebody who was beating a cop. Those are different crimes and they get different punishments. And all of them had their own individual trials for their individual crimes. It's not like they escorted 2,000 people up to a judge and said, everybody here was here on January 6th and they should all get the same punishment for whatever happened on that day. That's not what happened at all. Everybody had their own trial for their own crimes and they were given just punishment for what they actually did. One of the videos, this guy says, hey, why weren't they doing anything about the BLM riots and about Antifa in Portland? Why do the January 6th rioters get different treatment than all of those other rioters? And this is simply not true. This isn't true. Many, many, many rioters in many other cities through the George Floyd protest and Antifa setting up their little city, their autonomous city in Portland, many of those people were arrested and tried and thrown in prison. And the other thing is that there are different jurisdictions. What happens in Minnesota or Portland or Los Angeles is not a federal crime. You break into a Target in Des Moines, Iowa, the federal government is not going to come after you because that is a local crime. You break into the Capitol building, well, that's something different than breaking into a Target. And it doesn't matter if other people got away with stuff. You get a speeding ticket, it's no justification to say, yeah, but everybody else was speeding. The judge don't care. The highway patrol don't care. What matters is that you were actually speeding. That's all that matters. Were you or were you not speeding? It doesn't matter if other people got away with something. You broke the law. The court hearing is only about whether or not you broke the law. And this is different. This is way different than all of those other riots because it happened in the Capitol building. We have had this amazing nearly 250-year streak of peaceful transfers of power. And that was broken that day. It finally happened that we didn't have a peaceful transfer of power. And that's because of those jerks who showed up at the Capitol building and instigated a riot. Of course it's different. This is a big, big deal. If we have riots after every election, you don't think that's going to destabilize the country? Of course it's a different thing. All rioting is bad. Rioting in the Capitol building is a pretty big deal, and it's way different than rioting in a Target in Des Moines, Iowa. The precedent for this is terrible. The precedent says if you don't like an election, feel free to riot. Feel free to break things. Feel free to try to overturn it in gross, violent ways. That's cool. And you don't need to worry because the president will back you up. So if you're a Democrat and you don't like the election results next time, go for it. Just go for it, because the precedent has now been set that you can do whatever you want, and the president will eventually get you off the hook for it. It's cool. It's fine. This is awful. This is an awful thing to insert into our culture, into our dynamics, into our political discourse. It's no way to be as a country. And then finally, Trump's actions show that it wasn't Antifa doing this. It wasn't Pelosi's bad actors doing stuff and making it look like the true patriots were bad people. No, Trump acknowledges that those people who were doing bad stuff, they were his people. You know how I know? Because he pardoned them. He gave them all pardons, or at least commutations, where they don't have to be in prison anymore. Each and every single one of them. We've got video of you beating a cop in the head. We see your face in that video. We know who you are. We've got all the data that proves you were there that day. That's cool. You're out. You're fine. Clearly you weren't Antifa. You're one of my people. That's why I'm giving you a pardon, says Donald Trump. You're breaking windows open. You're opening doors for other people. That's cool. That's fine. No problem. You're one of mine. I'll give you a pardon. If they were Antifa, Donald Trump would not have given them pardons. There's one more thing that I should mention. There is video of Capitol Police giving high fives to people or showing people how to walk through the halls of the Capitol building. And this is evidence that it wasn't all violent and you're just making things look bad. Here's the deal. That was a very long day. Not everything, everywhere, all at once is going to be violent for all of those hours. My dad was in Vietnam. He served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam. By everything I can tell from his own stories and his recollections and everything else we know about the Vietnam War, it was a pretty terrible time. There was not a lot good going on there. We have one photo of my dad in Vietnam at an army base out in the middle of nowhere, and he's smiling. Well, how could you say that Vietnam was awful? How could you say war is terrible? You've got this photo of here of this guy smiling. It must not have been so bad. Yeah, because it's not bad all the time. At every single moment of every day isn't the worst experience of your life. It's the overall experience is what we're saying is bad. And yes, at the end of the day, when the Capitol Police knew they were outnumbered, they knew they needed to get people out. They were opening doors for people and showing people the way out. And they weren't agitating them, and they were intentionally not arresting them because they knew that they were vastly outnumbered, like 10-1. There was no point in trying to arrest everybody in that moment. They knew the video cameras were all over the building. They knew the arrest would come later. They were de-escalating the situation. They were just trying to encourage everybody to get out of the building as soon as possible. So some joker wants to high-five you on his way out the building, you high-five him because you know that he's going to get his consequences later. That's not a high-five into the building like, hey, we're all part of this. Hooray, we're really making Trump and the Republicans look awful. That's not what happened at all. That's not what those videos show. And if you saw them in the context that they were, and if you look at the timestamp, you would agree with that. But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know. And let me know why. I had fun and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.
It might be you. It's the wrong podcast.
Wrong!